I was lying in bed, aimlessly scrolling through my phone. It was midnight, and the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. My parents were traveling, and honestly, I liked that. No conversations about responsibilities or requests to turn down the TV. Just me, my phone, and a quiet night ahead. At least that's what I thought. I swiped my finger across the screen, and among comedy videos and makeup tutorials, a recommended video caught my attention. The title was ominous: The True Story of the Johnson Family Killer. Something about the title sent a chill down my spine, but curiosity won. I tapped the thumbnail and let the video load. The video started with an introduction that felt like a police report. A deep male voice described the events of a terrible night, where a man broke into the Johnson family's home and killed everyone, one by one. The images showed the isolated house, crime scene tape still hanging on the gates, and a grainy photo of the family: mother, father, and 2 children. I thought about stopping the video. It was starting to give me chills, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fact that the killer was never caught. He was still out there. The words echoed in my mind like a warning, but again, that morbid curiosity kept me from turning it off. As the video continued, the details got darker. The man, with his face covered by a strange mask, entered the house undetected, walked through the living room, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and, well, you can imagine the rest. I could barely blink as images of the house and detailed descriptions of the events unfolded on the screen. My eyes started to get heavy. Without realizing it, my body was giving in to sleep. The grim narrative blended with my drowsy state, and the images of the invaded house began to mix with random thoughts. I could still hear the voice from the video in the background, describing the family's final moments, when my eyes finally closed. The room was plunged into total darkness. Even with the phone still next to the bed, there was no more sound coming from the video. A strange silence filled the air, like the world had held its breath for a moment. And that's when the first sound echoed through the house. I woke up with a jolt. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room was completely dark, the only light being the faint glow of my phone next to my bed. I blinked several times, trying to remember what was happening. Had I fallen asleep? The video, The Johnson Family Killer. A chill ran down my spine as the grotesque details came back to me. Then I heard the sound again. A soft creak like the slow opening of a door. My heart started pounding. It was just my imagination, I thought, trying to convince myself. Maybe it was the house making those typical sounds of an old structure, creaking in the night. But that sound, it was different. Closer. I slowly got up, trying not to make a noise. My legs were shaky, and I felt cold sweat running down my back. As my feet touched the wooden floor, the creaking continued, this time coming from downstairs. It's nothing, I whispered to myself, but my words felt empty. With a courage I didn't know I had, I started walking down the hallway. The house felt different, almost distorted in the darkness. The silence between the creaks became unbearable. Every step seemed amplified on the wooden floor, and no matter how much I tried to be quiet, the sound of my movements echoed through the house. I reached my parents' room and, with a tightness in my chest, slowly opened the door. The room was empty. The bed, neatly made, looked untouched. My parents weren't there, but a feeling that something was off crept over me. I was confused. I knew they had left for a trip, but something about it made me even more anxious. I decided to go downstairs to the kitchen. Fear grew with every step I took, as if I was walking directly into the eye of a storm. When I got there, the sight before me was a scene ripped from a nightmare. The kitchen was covered in blood. The walls, the table, the floor. It was as if someone had recreated exactly what the video had shown. My eyes couldn't take it all in at once, and the shock prevented me from thinking clearly. There was a figure lying on the floor. I couldn't tell who it was, but the sight was enough to freeze me with terror. The instinct to scream took over, but no sound came out. My mouth opened, but the scream was trapped in my throat. Suddenly, I was in a panic, desperate to get away from that scene. Before I could react, everything started to fade again. My body became heavy, my eyes closing against my will. And then I woke up. My eyes snapped open, gasping. as if I had just escaped from drowning. I was back in my bed. I looked around, still panting, and the room seemed as normal as before. The phone was in the same place, the same faint light. For a brief moment, I convinced myself it had all been just a nightmare. Just a bad dream caused by the video. None of it was real. I sat up in bed, rubbing my face with my hands, trying to shake off that horrible feeling. It was just a dream, I kept repeating. A terrible dream. But as I looked at my trembling hands, I knew something was still wrong. Felt too real. I decided I needed to calm down. Maybe go to the bathroom, wash my face, clear my head. But little did I know the real terror was just beginning. Still breathing heavily, I got out of bed, trying to shake the remnants of that horrible nightmare from my mind. It was just a dream. That's what I kept telling myself. But the chill down my spine wouldn't let me fully believe it. Every step I took seemed to pull me further away from the safety of reality and push me back into the nightmare. As I walked down the hallway toward the bathroom, I felt a growing unease. The silence in the house was no longer comforting. It felt heavy, as if some invisible presence was watching me from every dark corner. When I reached the staircase, I was hit with an unexpected shock. Dark stains, drips, or rather bloodstains were trailing down the walls of the staircase. The exact same place where, in my dream, I had seen that terrible scene in the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of adrenaline surged through my body, freezing me in place for a moment. This wasn't possible. I was awake, or at least I thought I was. But how could I be seeing the same stains that existed only in my dream? I stood there for a few seconds, unable to move, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe I was still dreaming, a dream within a dream. That theory seemed reasonable, but at the same time, the pit in my stomach and the cold sweat on my hands told me it wasn't a dream. I started down the stairs, the steps creaking beneath my feet. With each step, the stains on the wall became clearer, as if the very darkness of the house was conspiring to bring the nightmare into reality. What once seemed like a disturbance of my mind was becoming part of my physical world. Or at least it seemed that way. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed the kitchen light was flickering, casting an irregular glow that threw sinister shadows on the walls. With every flicker of the bulb, the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, dancing across the hallway and ceiling. The atmosphere was becoming suffocating, and the fear now felt almost tangible. Forcing myself to walk toward the kitchen, I felt my feet hesitate, as if my whole body knew I shouldn't go there. But something was drawing me in, an invisible force. Maybe it was the irrational desire to understand what was happening, or the hope that, if I saw everything up close, the explanation would be less terrifying than it seemed from a distance. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, the scene before me was an exact repeat of my nightmare. The bloodstains were in the same places, splattered on the walls, forming patterns that seemed intentionally grotesque. It was real, very real. I was no longer dreaming. My legs were trembling, and the urge to run away took hold of me. God, what's happening? The feeling that someone or something was watching my every move grew even stronger. Somehow, I knew I wasn't alone in that house. But as much as I wanted to run, my legs felt glued to the floor. Before I could do anything, something behind me caught my attention. The faint sound of a floorboard creaking, like the weight of someone walking, echoed through the house, coming from the living room. My heart almost stopped. There was no one in the house but me, or so I thought. I swallowed hard, and my body reacted before my mind could fully process what was happening. I spun around quickly, facing the dark hallway, expecting to see something, someone. But there was only darkness and shadows. That's when I felt a presence behind me. I froze. I didn't dare turn around. The air around me felt thicker, as if someone was just inches away from me. The presence behind me was undeniable, and my whole body screamed for me to run, but my legs were glued to the floor, unable to obey. Panic swelled in my chest, suffocating, and I could feel every heartbeat like a drum pounding in my ears. Finally, with agonizing slowness, I turned my head. The hallway behind me was swallowed in shadows, but within them, I saw something, or someone, a silhouette. The figure of a man standing there motionless, as if he had been waiting for me to notice him. My body went cold. This wasn't a hallucination. I wasn't dreaming anymore. That man, the still figure in the hallway, was watching me. He wore a mask. A grotesque mask that seemed to distort his features into something inhuman. The shadows around him danced with the faint light from the kitchen, giving him an even more sinister appearance. My first instinct was to scream, but no sound came out. My chest was too tight, the fear swallowing any attempt at a reaction. He didn't move. He just watched me, as if savoring the moment, the terror his presence caused. The fear I felt now was so intense that I began to feel dizzy. The nightmare wasn't over. I was living inside it. Or maybe I had never woken up. Was I trapped in a cycle of horror? I took a step back, but the floor seemed to swallow my movements. With every inch I retreated, I felt him getting closer, without him needing to move at all. It didn't make sense. How had he gotten in? How had I not heard anything before? My brain desperately tried to find logic in what was happening, but there was nothing that could explain this. Suddenly I heard a sharp noise, a crack, that broke the silence. The figure took a step forward. I saw the glint of something in his hand. A knife. The same kind of knife I had seen in the video. My mind flashed back to that night. The video I had watched. The killer who was never caught. That mask. That man. It was him. He knew I had been watching his videos. He knew where I lived. He had been watching me the whole time, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I took another step back, this time faster. My legs finally started to respond. I was in flight mode, ready to run through the house, but where to? He was between me and the exit. Before I could decide what to do, the figure began walking toward me, the knife glinting in the dim light from the kitchen. Each step he took seemed to echo throughout the house, as if the walls were absorbing the sound. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, and that's when my body finally reacted. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. Terror consumed me completely. My only thought was to get out of there, to find a way to escape. The stairs felt endless as I climbed them, each step creaking under my trembling feet. I heard footsteps behind me. He was following. I reached the top of the stairs and, without thinking, ran back into my parents' bedroom. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I twisted the key in the lock. My heart was racing, and my whole body felt on the verge of collapse. Silence. Had he stopped following me? I knew the lock wouldn't protect me for long, but at that moment it was all I could do. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, my body trembling from head to toe. Everything was silent outside. Maybe he was waiting, as if he knew I couldn't hide forever. But then I heard a faint sound. A rustling, like someone moving slowly down the hallway. It couldn't be. He was there. He was waiting. The door felt like a fragile barrier between me and that masked man. Every second seemed like an eternity. I didn't know if he was still there, but the silence was more terrifying than any noise. Leaning against the door, trying to control my breathing, I began to doubt my sanity. What if all this was part of a deeper nightmare? I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the heaviness in my eyes. I was still exhausted, as if sleep had barely left me since the first nightmare. Had I never woken up? A part of me wanted to believe that if I just closed my eyes and opened them again, everything would have disappeared. After all, I had just woken up from a nightmare before. What was stopping this new horror from being just another layer of it? Suddenly, a soft noise brought me back to reality. It was the sound of the doorknob turning. A slow, almost teasing movement. He was on the other side. I thought quickly. There was no escape here. My parents' room was a dead end. I needed to act before he managed to get in. My eyes scanned the room, desperately looking for something, anything that could help me. My parents had some heavy wooden shelves, and without thinking, I pushed one toward the door. My hands trembled as I did this, but the sound of the doorknob stopping gave me brief relief. But for how long? I leaned against the opposite wall, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. as if his presence was invading the room even without him having entered. It was then that I noticed something strange. The silence. Total silence. The sound of the doorknob had stopped, but he wasn't trying to open the door anymore. No noise. No breathing. No shadows moving under the door. Nothing. My mind was on the verge of collapse. Had he given up? Or was he waiting, toying with me, letting the fear consume me from within? I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but the idea of leaving the room, of facing the unknown, paralyzed me. After a while, I decided I needed to check. I couldn't just wait for the inevitable. If he was there, I needed to know. If he had left, maybe I had a chance to escape. I pressed my ear against the door, hoping to catch any sound. My senses were on high alert, every cell in my body tense, waiting for any sign of him on the other side. But there was nothing, only the muffled sound of my own breathing. Then, with all the courage I could muster, I unlocked the door, moving the shelf as quietly as possible to avoid making noise. Every small movement pulled me back, urging me to stop, but I knew I couldn't. The door opened a crack. The hallway was dark. The kitchen light didn't reach that far. The whole house seemed to be shrouded in oppressive darkness, and there was no sign of him. I opened the door a little more, still on my knees, trying not to make any noise. I looked both ways down the hallway. Empty. But the silence didn't comfort me. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, as if the darkness itself was conspiring against me. I took a hesitant step out of the room, the floor creaking lightly under my trembling feet. With each step, the fear that he was lurking, just waiting, made the walk nearly unbearable. Then something even stranger happened. The whole house seemed to change. The hallway, the stairs, even the floor beneath my feet. Everything felt too familiar, as if I were reliving the nightmare from before. The bloodstains that had been so clear earlier were no longer there. The hallway was empty, clean. What was happening? My eyes scanned every inch around me, searching for any sign that I was awake. But nothing felt real. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere below. I approached the stairs, trying to convince myself that it was just a reflection of my fear. I had to get out of there. That was all that mattered now. But when I stepped on the first stair, I heard it. That sound again. Footsteps. This time they weren't mine. They weren't the slow, calculated steps of someone waiting for the right moment to attack. They were fast, rushed, as if someone was fleeing. And before I could react, the sound of a door opening echoed through the house. Someone was leaving. I ran to the bottom of the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Adrenaline surged through me again, making me sprint across the living room. When I reached the front door, it was open, swaying slightly, as if it had just been unlocked. He had left. But before I could celebrate, I looked around. The world seemed to spin. Nothing was right. The nightmare wasn't over. Somehow I knew he hadn't gone far. The echo of his footsteps was still alive in my mind. I stood there in the middle of the room as the wind swayed the open door. The cold dawn air entered the house, making my skin prickle. He had left, but that didn't mean I was safe. I still felt his presence, as if he were nearby, lurking in the shadows. I quickly shut the door, locking it with all the strength I could muster. My mind was racing. I needed to think. I needed to act. But fear paralyzed me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't organize my thoughts. I walked back down the hallway, my eyes scanning every corner of the house, expecting him to appear from somewhere. Every step was torture. Every sound, no matter how small, made me jump. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Or was he still there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again? My hands trembled as I passed through the kitchen. The light flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw something move in the reflection of the window. But there was nothing there. Only the darkness outside and my own pale reflection. Then I remembered. My parents. I still didn't know where they were. What if something had happened to them? Fear hit me again with full force, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. I ran down the hallway, racing back up the stairs to their room. The bloodstains I had seen earlier. Everything had disappeared. The room was exactly as it had always been, empty and untouched. The beds were made, with no signs of a struggle or violence. Doubt began to eat away at me. Had I imagined it all? But it couldn't be. I had seen it. I had seen the blood. I had heard the footsteps. I had felt his presence. There was no way that all of it had just been a delusion brought on by fear. I stopped in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. The silence was more oppressive than ever. And then I noticed something new. Something that shouldn't have been there. A note. On my parents' bed, there was a piece of paper. Trembling, I slowly approached, picking up the note with shaky hands. The dim light from the hallway wasn't enough for me to read it right away, so I moved toward the window, letting the streetlight illuminate the hurriedly written words. I see you. My heart raced. That couldn't be real. He had been here in my parents' room. I was being watched even as I tried to escape, even as I fought to understand what was happening. He was always ahead of me, always one step ahead. I collapsed onto the bed, my mind spinning in panic. He had been playing with me the entire time. The video, the fear, the nightmare. It was all part of something bigger. Something I still couldn't fully comprehend. But one thing was certain. I had never been alone. The lights in the house started flickering again, and this time more intensely. Panic consumed me. Every flicker felt like a warning, a reminder that he was still there, that he wasn't done yet. I didn't know what to do. I locked all the doors, all the windows, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. He had found me before, and he could find me again easily. Then the most terrifying sound I had ever heard echoed through the house. A low, distorted laugh coming from somewhere downstairs. It wasn't possible. The door was locked, I was sure of it. I froze. My ears strained, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything beyond the fear pulsing through my veins. But the laughter continued, as if it were getting closer, as if he were just toying with me, savoring every second of my terror. My legs wouldn't move. I wanted to run, to hide, to do anything to get out of that house, but my body simply wouldn't respond. I was frozen, stuck to the spot, as the sound of the laughter filled every corner of the house. Finally, when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was even more unbearable. It was as if the house itself was waiting, just like me, for his next move. Then the sound of footsteps began again. Slow. Calculated. Each step reverberated through the wood of the house, echoing in my mind. And this time there was no doubt. He was coming toward me. I stood up with difficulty, my legs nearly giving way beneath me. I had to do something. There was no more time to hesitate, to try and understand. I had to survive. I bolted out of the room, running down the hallway and down the stairs as fast as I could. The sound of footsteps seemed farther away now, but that brought me no comfort. I knew he was close, waiting to appear again. When I reached the front door, my heart almost stopped. It was open. I stopped suddenly, staring at the wide-open door in front of me. How was that possible? I had locked it. I was sure of it. But there it was, open, as if he had entered and left without me even noticing. My mind started racing with impossible scenarios. Had he been inside my house the whole time? Maybe it was just another trick, part of the macabre game he seemed to be playing with me. Or maybe it was something worse. I swallowed hard and approached the door, the midnight wind colder than ever. The sky outside looked like a bottomless pit, black and threatening. The streetlights flickered, blinking on and off as if trying to send me a signal. I was frozen on the threshold between the safety of my house and the danger outside. If I crossed that door, I would be walking straight into his path, into the territory where he seemed to control every step. But staying inside didn't seem like a safe option anymore either. I had no more choices. That's when I heard it again. The laugh. This time it wasn't so distant. It was coming from the backyard. A low, almost muffled sound, but unmistakable. He was out there. My heart raced again. Panic coursed through my veins like poison, paralyzing me. What should I do? Face the unknown or stay locked in my own prison, waiting for him to decide when to come get me? That's when something inside me shifted. I would no longer be a passive victim. He might be stronger, crueler, more unpredictable, But I wasn't going to stand there frozen by fear. I had to fight, even if that meant facing the very terror he was bringing into my life. With this newfound determination, I ran to the kitchen, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. I grabbed a knife, holding it with trembling but determined hands. I didn't know what I would do with it, but at least I had something to defend myself with. I returned to the front door, slamming it shut again with a bang. The sound echoed through the empty house, but I strangely felt safer doing it. As if, for a few minutes at least, I was in control. But that was before I heard the noise. It came from the basement. My eyes widened. The basement. I hadn't even remembered that. That dark, damp place always avoided by my family, but which suddenly seemed to be the epicenter of all the terror. If he was there, if that sound was coming from there, I had to know. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee the house, leave it all behind. But something was pulling me. A strange force that wouldn't let me leave. As if I was being drawn to that basement, as if I had to confront the evil hiding down there. I descended the stairs slowly, each step harder than the last. My breathing was short, my heartbeat racing. The knife was still firm in my hands, but I knew that against him it wouldn't be enough. The sound grew louder, closer, as if someone was there just waiting for me. And for a second I wondered if all of this was real. Had I lost control of my mind? Was I trapped in some kind of endless nightmare? Finally, I reached the basement door. The old worn wood was slightly ajar, the darkness below deeper than ever. I took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. If he was there, I would face him. I had nowhere else to run. With a gentle push, I opened the door completely, the faint light from the kitchen barely illuminating the wooden steps. I descended slowly, the knife in my right hand, my heart pounding frantically in my chest. When I reached the last step, I noticed something strange. The sound had stopped. There was no more laughter, no footsteps, no breathing sounds I had heard before. Just silence. The basement was empty. I walked slowly, scanning the room. The smell of mold and earth was strong, suffocating. The walls were made of old bricks, with some cracks where moisture had seeped in over the years. But something wasn't right. That's when I saw it. In the center of the basement on the floor there was a small dark stain. Blood. I approached, my heart nearly stopping when I realized it wasn't a random stain. It was a trail of blood, leading to the darkest corner of the basement. And there, in the darkness, something moved. My body froze. The knife slipped slightly in my sweaty hand, but I kept moving forward, as if an invisible force was pulling me toward that place. Every step was torture, and then I saw him. He was crouched in the corner, his face hidden by shadow, but I knew it was him. The man in the mask. The same one I had seen so many times in my nightmares, in the stories I'd watched, in my worst memories. And before I could react, he slowly stood up, the white, cold mask reflecting the faint light coming from the stairs. He didn't say anything. He just watched me, and then he took a step forward. My body froze. There was no escape. The killer was there, in front of me, the white mask reflecting the little light that entered the basement. I knew this was real, that the terror running through my veins was no longer the product of a nightmare. It was the end of the game, and I was at the center of it. He approached slowly, the silence in the room making each step sound like a drumbeat, increasing the weight of the tension. There was no place to hide, no place to run. I was cornered. Why did you do this? My voice came out weak, trembling, while my mind desperately tried to find a solution, a way to get out of there alive. But he didn't respond. His eyes, hidden behind the mask, seemed to be watching me as if I were prey he was savoring before attacking. Then, in a quick motion, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. My breath caught in my throat as he revealed a camera. Not a knife, not a weapon, but a camera. He pointed it at me, and the click of the shutter echoed through the basement like thunder. He was taking pictures, photographing the terror on my face, capturing the moment as part of his macabre game. For a moment that paralyzed me even more. What did he want with this? But the answer was right there. He didn't just want to kill me. He wanted me to know that I was part of something bigger, a living trophy for his sick memories. Without saying a word, he took another step forward. My heart felt like it was about to explode. The knife was still in my hand, but the distance between us was shrinking, and I knew I wouldn't have a chance to use it. He was faster, stronger. He was in control. Then, something unexpected happened. A distant sound echoed through the house. A sound that made him stop, still holding the camera. His mask turned toward the stairs. It was the sound of sirens. The police. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. How did they know? Who could have called? But it didn't matter. Those seconds of distraction were my only chance. With all the strength left in my body, I lunged forward, pushing him with everything I had, trying to break free from the shadow that seemed immortal. He stumbled, falling back while I ran to the stairs, not looking back. My feet barely touched the steps as I rushed up frantically, each step bringing me closer to the surface, to the light, to salvation. The sirens grew louder, closer. I needed to get out of there. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't give up so easily. He was down there, getting up, furious. I could feel it. And at any moment, he would come after me. I reached the kitchen door, shoving it open, and ran outside, feeling the cold night air envelop me. The sound of the sirens was right there, and in the distance, I saw the flashing red and blue lights. The police. I didn't know how, but they were there. And for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Terrified, covered in blood, but alive. I was alive. Then I heard the basement door slam open behind me. I looked back, my body still in shock, and saw him coming out. He was coming. The masked killer, the man who had terrorized me for so long, was chasing me. But now the police were there, just a few meters away. And I ran like never before. 2 officers spotted me and rushed toward me. I could barely speak, adrenaline coursing through my body, but they understood enough. He was there. The officers drew their weapons and entered the house, while I stayed outside, surrounded by other officers trying to calm me down. My mind was in chaos. I still felt his presence, even knowing he was about to be captured. Or was he? The minutes dragged on, and then silence fell again. When the officers returned, there was no one. The basement was empty. The house, a labyrinth of darkness and shadows. He had disappeared. No trace, no clue, nothing. The man who tormented me, who invaded my life and nearly killed me, had escaped. Like a ghost. The days that followed were a blur of investigations, questions, and vague answers. They never found him. He was still out there. And I knew he was still watching. That feeling of being watched never left me. No matter where I was, at home, on the street, or even surrounded by others, I always felt that he was there. It was as if, even without seeing him, he was close, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. To this day, when I'm alone at night, I still feel his eyes on me. The masked killer who made me his prey remains free. And although the police never found a single clue, I know he never left. He spared me, but only to continue his sick game.